Okay. I think we're good now. Steve, can you see the stream? Thanks, Xavier. What? I don't know. I have no idea what just happened. Everything, all the metrics were fine. The metrics were fine in OBS. The metrics were fine on YouTube. The only thing that was happening was when I went into the YouTube studio, there was a black screen instead of the preview. And it wasn't like the, hey, you need to send data black screen. It was just like a black screen. So I have no idea what happened. But thank you for letting me know, because I definitely like saw your message, Xavier, and I was like, huh, I wonder what they mean by am I okay? Oh, okay. Well, welcome to the stream. Yeah, it definitely didn't feel like an issue on my side. But then again, I did reboot and then it did start working, so I don't know. I now have like 3 additional streams from this morning, I guess. Okay. Hopefully the people from the other chat, the chats didn't like connect at all, right? You had to click on it when it went live. So bizarre. I need to delete the old live at some point. I guess I'll do that later. It's fine. It's fine. Everybody can see how badly I've streamed today. All right, so yeah. And if you click into that stream, it's just like a loading icon if you like click through the video. So I'm not really sure what happened there. But welcome to the Spinny Dance Party. When I realized that the stream was not playing, I was in the middle of locking the axes for the NPCs. But for now, we're just playing Beyblade, I guess. Okay, well, I guess nothing I said came through, so I'll start from the top. I added this new shader in here for the floor. This is a standard material extension. So inside of Blender, we've got that custom material enum, or custom material replacement enum, and now it has a tile floor in addition to item pickup. So that's the tile floor. And then if I go to the material is a, oh, that's the wrong one. I want the WGSL file. So the material is being scaled in the shader. So I could scale this up and make it really small, or scale this to like the original size, which is way too big, or really anything in between. I think I want to go for like a big chonky tile look, so I'm leaving it kind of at this. There is an issue with the texture for these tiles. There is a gloss on the top, like northeast third of the tile, and that just looks like a straight line. So I'll have to swap this out for something else at some point. And then I added ambient light and colored the walls inside of Blender. I feel like the ambient light should still be a little higher. Yeah, it didn't take my ambient light settings for some reason. This is the ambient light that I wanted. Or this is the one that I set up. So everything's a little bit brighter. It'll be a little bit more toon-like. We'll get a toon shader in here for some stuff, probably, at some point. Not a priority, but the wall sides are a black hole, so no or very little ambient light in the main light. Yeah. That's exactly it. So I thought I fixed that already, but apparently I didn't. So I guess this ambient light resource that I'm inserting isn't getting used, which makes me feel like I'm doing something that is just old. Oh, the other thing, I showed my new site on stream too. So I'm working on a new personal site with Leptos and stuff. So this will come out at some point soon. And then I went over the Wear Cleaner is a game that came out recently that I feel like fits the vibe that I want to move towards. Very flat shading, very toon. Like it feels like if you picked up any of these walls and you dropped them, that they would kind of like bounce. Not like they were styrofoam, but like they were that soft, like slightly squishy but firm cube. Reasonably different game, but feel like the aesthetic is very relevant. And then we upgraded Bevy Navigator. It has a crates.io release with the new features. And there was really only one update we needed to make. So nav mesh bundle with default ID instead of ... default. We only have one nav mesh, so it's not an issue for us. Yeah, all diffuse, no specular, classic for a low poly look. Yeah. I might sneak in some random, reflections and stuff like that, but I think in general, I want it to be that kind of like playful, light block feel. So I clearly did something wrong with the ambient light. Let's check the examples for what an ambient light should look like. And let's do it on 0.14's branch, because a lot of the required components changes are starting to land. So examples, ambient light none, ambient light whatever. Yeah, so it should be in the resources. Color and brightness. Makes me feel weird that this one isn't getting used then. Does it need to go in after the default plugins? No. Am I additionally setting it somewhere else? Yes. In the game scene. So with the ambient light, I was talking a little bit about like we could use an environment map, but I haven't seen any indoor environment maps, honestly. So, shrug. This feels a little bit bright now. I think I actually wanted it at something lower. Ambient light. Okay, it looks fine, but only when the floor is loaded in. I think that's what we had before. On your project, you got to implementing the sprite shader that used two images, one texture 2, U32, and the other texture 1, F32. You first load the index from the 2D texture and use that to load from the 1D texture. So you have a mesh 2D with a material, two textures, a 2D texture and a 1D texture. The U32 is there for the padding over the U8. So the texture 2D is your colors. And then the texture 1D is what? The actual like color texture, the albedo. You load the index from the 2D texture and use that index to load from the 1D texture. I guess I'm not sure what you're using the two different textures for. Isn't your thing that you're talking about the magenta masking shader, right? Oh, okay. Texture 1D is the palette. So you're doing a recoloring of the sprites. Oh, okay. The pinking is a different material. That makes more sense. So your 2D texture. Okay, so we need to get these characters to like resist spinning if they're gonna be like this. But the other thing, dynamic gets us some really easy wins to start with, but I don't know that we want it forever. So I think we really don't want dynamic in general. But that means we kind of need to implement our own collisions, I think. I know the player is dynamic. So like the player customer interactions work automatically here. But customer interactions won't if we do it like that. Nice. You'll post a small video? Sweet. I don't know what an SPR file is. N by M are images. hundreds of PAL files that are 256 by 1 RGBA images. Oh, so they're like, okay, really wide 256 palettes. So you already know that everything's 256. Therefore, if you are getting a specific color, you can swap it out for a different palette. That's nice. I don't think we want Bevy Tenua for everything. I'm trying to stay simple on the NPC side for the moment. We could theoretically drive all the NPCs via Bevy Tenua, but that feels... I don't know. It's using a random PAL from the folder. That's why some look... Okay, I'll check it out. Let's see. I don't open Discord on my... Oh, nice. That works out really well. Hey, Miner. Welcome to the stream. So it's using the PAL files from the folder, some of which don't have the right data, I would assume. Okay, so Avian 3D, not Bevy Tenua. Great. No, not Terry's profile. Terry's great, but it's not what we want to be looking at right now. Okay. So I feel like I'm 50-50. Hey, Senk, how's it going? Welcome to the stream. They have the right data for their corresponding .spr, but using them on random ones are mismatched. Yeah, that makes sense. So the question is, the larger question is, what do we do with the customers? What are they supposed to be doing during the game? I feel like having them walk around the store would be better. Right now, they are just piling up. I do feel like making them collide with each other is important. But the dynamic collisions do make it a little bit awkward. So we basically, like, fundamentally, we have two choices, right? We can do dynamic, which gives us automatic inter-object collisions. Or we can do kinematic, in which we have to do the collisions ourselves. It's really weird that this tile texture takes so long to load. Especially since it starts preloading. See, like that. Like the... they get, like, locked. I think that character is still actually technically moving towards the platform, but... the way that we're... Actually, now that I think about it, the way that we're actually telling these characters to go in certain locations is by modifying the transforms. So when they spawn here, we're actually just throwing them. So the reason they're spinning is actually my controller code, not any kind of physics issue. Right, because we're using the translation here, which doesn't work for dynamic rigid bodies. So do I want to rewrite that right now is the question. I don't think I do. The other question is how physical is the game going to be in general? And right now it's not very physical. You kind of just run around. I think you need to run around a little bit slower. It's really funny that they like shoot into the world. Like, do I want you to be able to push the characters around? I don't necessarily think so. Not in that dynamic kind of way, anyway. So I think we go to kinematic. One of the things that I absolutely need to do is kind of figure out where to take it from here. Because if we do, so theoretically, I've been talking about this as like a washing, like a laundromat, right? But I'm having trouble thinking of all of the places people can go inside of a laundromat. Do they have to go to the same position? No, they don't. They just are going to the same position at the moment. That's kind of what I'm getting at. Right now, we're kind of just saying, oh, they go here, you pick it up, as if there was like a customer counter there, right, where you're meeting them or something. But they don't have to do that either. And I've been thinking about the game as if it was a laundromat, but I don't know. It's very easy to come up with like places that customers need to go inside of a restaurant, right? Like they need to go sit down, they need to get their food. If it's a buffet, they go up to get it, et cetera, et cetera. In a laundromat, I really can't think of that many things for the customers to do. Like there's a couple of machines. We can potentially upgrade the machines. They kind of have to go to the machines, right? Is that a YouTube video on laundromat design flaws? I'm gonna save that for later. That's hilarious. That's a video on YouTube. You can find anything. So if we look at a laundromat, I guess there could be waiting areas. The customers could be putting their own things in. And then there could be like back rooms. And the goal could be like fixing the machines and things like that. And then I guess the customers come in, they wait for like one of the machines to open. which gives them a place to be that is separate from all of the other NPCs. And then they more or less kind of like manage their own laundry, and then you just run around fixing things. I guess you could do a little bit more with that too, right? Like you could build a whole like arcade next to this to like entertain people as they're doing their laundry or whatever. But I definitely feel like right now, with the idea of just people dropping stuff off, you picking it up, throwing it into a machine, waiting, giving it back, that's not really enough of a mechanic. Like the inventory transfer is useful. What does this say? This is an actual floor plan. See, like they have like a kid's play area in here. Top load washers, front load washers. I don't know what an MFR is. 40-pound washers, 60-pound washers. So I guess different load sizes. Dryers over here. It's hard to make different components interact with each other or not straightforward in ECS style. What do you mean by that? Can you give me an example? So they have a bathroom in here. They have 75. So basically, tables with shelves, soap dispensers. If we go in that direction, it feels a little bit more automation-y, though. And I'm not sure that... I mean, okay, so if I build an automation game, that's a significantly larger game. You need to build so much more stuff for an automation game. I think that's out of the genre bucket right now. Like I'm looking for something simpler, more toonish, more like 5-minute gameplay-ish, or 5-minute rounds or something like that. So I think I need to come up with a way to deal with what the customers are doing, what the player's doing. That is a little bit more physical, I think. You're very new to Rust and Bevy, but for example, you have ball entity and goal entity, like in football. Okay. You're having trouble like figuring out when the ball is in the goal or something like that. I assume also that you mean football is in like American soccer football and not American football. Well, collision detection is actually pretty reasonable. So there's stuff inside of Bevy to do collision detection. Bevy engine. I never go to the website anymore, so the GitHub repo is always my... in here, there's bounding... I forget, I can never remember what this example is called. So this is a test for things like bounding boxes and raycasts and whatever. This is fine. It's a little bit less functional than something like Avian We'll go with avian 3D, I guess. So avian, maybe we should go to the repo. The repo will have examples. So avian 3D, and then we've got what? Doesn't actually look like there's a good example in here to show this off. This is very much API examples, which is fine. Let me use the game that we are building to talk about this then. So, the place that all the customers are standing right now is actually just a square mesh with a component on it. So well, that's coming from Blender, so it's a little bit harder to show off, but let me show you what that means. So that's not floor, customer drop off. Customer drop off has a couple of components on it, right? Colliders, a component that is just kind of like a label component, so customer drop off location, and then sensor. So the collider constructor and the sensor from avian 3D work together to be able to tell whenever anything is inside of that area. And then from there, you have two choices. Where's the drop-off code? From there, you have two choices. You can either query the events that are coming in. So every time a customer goes into that area, they fire a collision event, and you can handle those. So for a goal, you might do the collision event. Or you can use this colliding entities hash map, which allows you to detect what is inside of what for any given sensor or whatnot. That's what I tend to do here, because they're going to enter that, and then as long as they're in that area, I want this other thing to turn on, so this blue drop-off location. So I just iterate through those, and I use the queries. So this one is customers. So any entity with a customer NPC counts here. Yeah, I think I'm going to sneeze. Ooh, 3-1. 3 sneezer. Sorry about that. Okay, so this colliding entities is a hash map. So you can use those queries, and you can check to see if the sensor contains any of the others, and then do whatever you want based on that. Yeah, that one was rough, Minor. And then based on that, do something. So like, if we find a customer in the sensor, then either turn that light on or off. That's what this code is doing. Let me read some scroll back. Yeah, I would lean more on events if you're having trouble thinking about this. You think about it in this sense. You need to do detection of the state, and you also need to do some event to handle that, which today is probably an observer. Does that make sense? Like, you need some way to detect what's happening. In this case, it's collisions, so we have a sensor, and we detect which entity is within which other sensor. And then here, if we wanted to do something with that, you would fire an observer. Observers are really, really cool. I actually have a video on my channel on observers if you want to watch that to understand exactly what they are. Do we have one in this file? Yeah, so here's a good example. Customer spawn cycle is just regular thing. It runs, every frame or something like that, based on some condition. So this is based on some RNG generation. We trigger some observer event. that event can then get handled in any system. And you can do whatever you want in here. You can query for everything. You can query for all of your elements, all of the sensors, all of the colliders, whatever you want to do. In this case, I'm querying for things like the mesh that I want to spawn them. And then picking a point on that mesh to actually spawn in the player or the customer. Similar to like signals in Godot, basically. I'm not familiar with the signals implementation in Godot. If they're just events, then yes. If they're signals like the JavaScript world calls them signals, then they're not quite the same. Hukasu says, would you have events like washer leaking and you have to get a mop to dry the floor? Yes. That customer has a few dozen arms. Yeah, it's a, what do we say? Cthulhu came to wash their clothes. But yeah, does that make sense? Like you have to at some point detect some condition, and then you have to run some code in response to that. And usually those are going to be in two different systems. Sometimes they'll be in the same system, whatever. Like it doesn't really matter one way or the other, but I would definitely look into observers if you haven't looked into them yet, because it will handle this kind of like, oh, I just want to do some random thing from a bunch of different systems on some condition or whatever. Straight out of Carrion. What is Carrion? Carrion. Vaguely familiar with what you mean by that. I don't think I could explain it anymore, but I have an image in my head. Multi-armed eldritch being. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, the question, if we go down that route, is like, I want to avoid making a, how do I say this? I want to avoid making a satisfactory kind of thing, right? Like I don't want to go into that genre. So like if you are responsible for building out this store and whatnot, if you're responsible for maybe like laying out the whole area, then there's some building mechanics we need to build out, right? We do have some small building mechanics. We have the ability to pop up the virtual grid and then place things in different spots. And this is a very regular, very repeatable kind of thing, which is great. And then you can do like little upgrades on them and stuff like that. That sounds good. I kind of want to fit it into like a 5-minute day cycle. So like customers come in the morning, in the afternoon, and at night, and then the shop kind of like closes for the day, and then you do upgrades or something like that. I also don't really want to venture into incremental games, but it feels a little bit like it's headed towards satisfactory / incremental game, and I don't particularly love that. So I just want to make sure that I'm redirecting a little bit. I think that the inventory system is super useful. because even the customers will have to transfer to the machines. But then the question is, what is the player doing? You need it more like multitask survival game. What is a multitask survival game? I was originally thinking something a little bit more like Overcooked. But it's like, I was thinking it's very easy to like place customers into places and have them wait for things. I guess you could be like in the back faking all of the laundry, you know? Like the customers put their stuff into the washing machines and then the washing machines like dump it into the back room where you and your little minions are like trying to clean things as fast as possible. Kind of like a very silly version of like dang, I can't remember the name of the thing. Basically the idea that like you can make something look automated but actually just have a person inside of it. So in that case, these games don't include any kind of building. And the other games, at least I don't think they do. Everything's preset. And you kind of grab things and go back and forth. And then there was, what was it called? I can't remember the name of this. There's this one which I haven't played at all, so I actually don't know exactly what the gameplay is for this. This is like, if you get seen as a werewolf, you have to kill them and then clean it up because you're the janitor. Will there be machines that some customers can self-service? I think that that's the idea that I'm leaning towards right now. Because, like, I just don't know that running up to different customers and grabbing stuff and running it back. I think we could still make that work, but I don't know. I'm like thinking about it right now. Like Amazon's no checkout stores went from no footage is reviewed by a human to underpaid reviewing footage real quick. Yeah. Very, very much the vibe of like, hey, this is like our highly, you know, whatever automated washing machine. And then you put your clothes in the washing machine and all that really happens is the floors dump out onto the floor. Or the clothes like dump out through the bottom onto the floor. And then like somebody goes and picks them up and like puts them over here and starts cleaning them. I feel like I'm trying to think about how that would work in my head. Basically the idea of potentially multiple floors. Right? Because if there's a building mechanic, right? Then there has to be like a back room. I don't think I would do top floor, bottom floor. I think I would do like a back room. I don't know if you would actually physically connect them yourself. That sounds a little bit tough. Hold on. What? But like imagine this room on the left is like the actual laundromat that the customers come into, that they, you know, are walking around, they find their washing machines and whatever, they put stuff in. And then you kind of have to receive everything over here. So you're never actually directly interfacing with the customers. It's just actually literally dumping them on the floor in the corner over here. And that pile just gets bigger and bigger. So you have to go over, you have to grab like some items out of that and then put it into actually getting cleaned. That does sound a little bit better. And then this doesn't need to be the layout of the like laundromat or whatever, but yeah, I use Bevy Navigator. Absolutely. That's what's happening right here. So if I do like this. Oh, I forgot I still have the double stack enabled. That's hilarious. If I do like this and I spawn an NPC, they should not have walked through there. Maybe there's too many of them. Maybe I let the game run too long. Virtual grid. Let's do this. You know, I just realized I don't think I'm using the navigator, or I'm not updating the customer's navigation. That's on me. What do you mean by made the grid myself? Like the placement grid? Like this thing? That is custom for sure. What file is that in? So I have a file called grid here. I don't think this actually does that much. It's like 370 lines. This isn't actually relevant. Let's see. This is the interact with machine code. That's the test system. Raycast system. Do work. Start work. Okay. So TLDR is we have a mesh in the world. And we use Bevy mod Raycast. So Bevy mod Raycast is the underlying library for Bevy mod picking. So we're using Bevy mod Raycast here directly. So when you turn the virtual grid on, it happens to be the same exact level as the floor. So that's why it looks weird like that. But just ignore that. It spawns in a mesh. The green mesh is the mesh that we click on. And then I can get rid of it. So that is basically determined from mouse position through Bevy mod Raycast. Whenever you click on it, we get that location. In this case, we are using a substate to like kick you into virtual grid placement mode and back out. And when we do that, we either spawn that mesh and then get rid of it when you leave. So we use the Raycast mesh with the virtual grid Raycast, and then we write a Raycast system for what to do when you actually do click. In this case, we show a gizmo, and We should be rounding this somewhere. That's really what I want to show. So for the mesh, we do the intersection query, which is just dot intersections with Bevy mod raycast. Here's the round. So for every position, we're rounding to the nearest one. So you can see with this grid, it doesn't let me do anything but place the items in a 1x1 infinite grid. And that's just because we're rounding that position. It has nothing to do with, there's nothing special about it. There's nothing like interesting about it. It is literally just a rounded value from the position value. So you get only whole numbers in this position. Then we render a gizmo for the cuboid to determine or to like show you where that grid position is. And then we spawn in, if you click, one of these workstations with a bunch of components. I'm using blenvy, so I'm actually grabbing the GLTF stuff from a GLB that is exported from Blender. But we also do transform, set an inventory for the item, et cetera, et cetera. And then this is an observer. So when you click on that, it fires the start work observer. And then we keep a grid store so that I know where things are in the world. So theoretically, if I wanted to make sure that, I don't know, something wasn't already there, I could use this grid store, do a lookup, make sure that there's nothing there before placing something. But yeah, it's very, very, very simple. It's literally just get the intersection data, round it to the nearest one, and then do whatever you want to do. So there's no like fancy plugin for this. This is like, it doesn't require that much other than the raycast plugin. So in that case, I guess the different machines will have different states themselves too. We are going to eventually need a state machine implementation. Static is the wrong one. What is the one that I wanted to use? Seldom state, I think, is the one that I've used before. Well, not the only one I've used before, but seldom state is pretty dope. I am not like super in love with the API, but it allows you to define different states. So for example, a washing machine could be in a specific state, and then something could happen to it and it could break and it go into a different state or whatever. And then based on those states, which are just stored as components on the entity, we can do queries and like, if one is broken, then start flooding, that kind of thing. The question is, which of those mechanics fit together? Does it make sense to be able to place stuff, to be able to upgrade these machines and stuff? Or is the level already preset and then each level is a combination of a set of machines and a set of customers that need to do a bunch of work? I feel like I like the idea of something a little bit more roguelike, but that does mean that there needs to be like a bajillion upgrades. I'm not going to worry about that too much at the moment. I do feel like the customers should be going directly to these machines though. Like they should enter, they should go into the room with all the stuff in it. If one is open, they should put stuff in. If the one is not open, they should just like hang out. Is that more useful than just having label components representing different states? Yes, because it will do the cleanup and stuff automatically for you. Right. Like if you have components, so fundamentally it is just having components representing different states. So if you wanted to do it in a slightly different way, you could totally do that. The nice thing about using this state machine abstraction is it lets you very specifically fire things when states change, or when you're transitioning from one state into another. It allows you to do that kind of thing inside of these transitions and whatnot. So it's basically just a little bit of ergonomics on top of components representing different states. It is not like a completely separate like concept, if that makes sense. The other thing is that you basically get to use run conditions for all these triggers. So if you have a machine and you have like a run conditions like if was clicked on or something like that, you know? So I find the things like on enter, insert some component or something like that, some other bundle or whatever, those kinds of things are super useful. See, do I have an example in here? That's the done trigger. The done trigger isn't really what I want. Set up, player spawn. Where's the state machine? So state machine on the enemy. You define a transition for idle. If it's near the player, then it will add a component called follow. If you are in the follow state and you are not near the player anymore, transition to the idle state. So it makes like this kind of thing is really nice to just have in one location. I think there's another state machine for the player probably too, right? Maybe not. Maybe it's just that simple one for the enemy. But yeah, like this follow is a component. So just some syntax sugar kind of vibe, some helpers. Yes, yes, absolutely. That's exactly what it's doing. You basically get game state as per entity state, but it's driven by components and not by like a global state. Again, I'm not sure that that API is my favorite API, but it does work, and I have used it before, so. Okay, so. Hey, Ryan, how's it going? It almost wasn't stream time this morning. YouTube was messing up for the first hour. Okay, so the decisions here are kind of very design oriented. I think I have a design file in here that doesn't really have much in it. Yeah, okay. So let me... This is a .org file. That's hilarious. I guess maybe I'll fill this out later. I won't do that on stream. But the idea here, or the thing that I've been thinking about on stream for the last, I don't know, 20 minutes or so, is that the mechanics here are definitely like, go pick it up. If you're not close enough, it tells you. If you are close enough, it takes it. It does some work over some period of time. Tells you when it's done. Then you pick it back up and you go and they leave. But that isn't like super fun as like the mechanic, if that makes sense. I'm having a hard time seeing how you would build on top of that for direct player customer interaction. So we were just thinking about what does the gameplay actually look like when it comes down to it. I do have a couple of constraints. Maybe I'll write these constraints down. So constraints are like, I want like a 5-minute gameplay loop, I think. There's a big question around whether building is actually in the game or not. Right now, you can place machines anywhere you want. I think that's interesting because the benefits of being able to build stuff are upgrade paths are pretty easy in terms of you can place more machines, they're more efficient. I want to make sure that this is not an automation or an incremental game. I'm not building Satisfactory here, and I don't want to build an incremental game. I know that there are plenty of people that like incremental games, but that's not what I want to build. So if we can place things in the world, upgrade paths, like all of those roguelike kinds of things come out of this. Which is really cool. I do think that, like, I am using Chinua. Feel free to ask a question about Chinua. I don't know that I'll be able to answer it. But yeah, I am using Chinua. So instead of 5-minute, let's say short gameplay loop. Roguelike-ish. I like the idea of like being able to buy upgrades. I like the idea of it being kind of silly for theme-wise. Right? Like washing machines don't actually wash. Like if the customer comes in and they dump stuff into a washing machine, it's kind of funny to be like, oh, the washing machine is then connected to a different room that the player is in. And they're just taking everything out of the pile and kind of like washing it and trying to put it back in the right spot. And that still gives us the ability to do like little tasks. Player definitely moves too fast right now. I think that the let's restart this for a second. So as it stands, the gameplay loop would look like this. You would do some kind of machine placement. This customer would come into the store. Oh, my hand is not on the keyboard in the right way. You would go dump this into the machine. More customers would start coming in. This then sends them away when you give it to them. There might be a bug about when there's additional customers there. There we go. So that dropped off all of the customers' stuff and then they leave. And like, that's fine. But if I do what I was thinking about doing, which is basically like go over to a washing machine, choose what goes into it, and then do like a little Among Us style mini game, then it's not super frantic. It's just a lot of clicking. You're trying to copy how you can pick up objects in Half-Life 2, specifically objects sort of rubber band to your view. Is Tenua the right tool to mimic this kind of object movement? You know what is probably the right tool to mimic object movement? Is avian pickup. Which is a plugin for picking up dynamic rigid bodies in avian physics for the Bevy game engine, modeled after Half-Life 2's gravity gun. So, if you want Half-Life 2 like object pickup, this is probably where I would start. Not saying you can't go do it yourself or whatever. This is where I would start. And I don't think that Bevy Tenua has any impact on that. I think that the player controls are Bevy Tenua, and the interaction with this pickup mechanic would be this plugin. And I think that they would not really overlap that much, right? Like the player controls and the ability to pick something up are kind of very separate. So you can still use Bevy Tenua or not, but this is definitely the first place I would look. One caveat here is that I believe this only works on Bevy main because it works against the main branch of Avian for some reason. I don't remember exactly why. It's also worth noting that the Bevy 0.15 release candidate releases are probably going to come out over the next 2 weeks. Like towards the end of the next 2 weeks is what I would guess. Again, don't take that as like a firm commitment or anything, but if you are looking at this and this is something that you want, it does point to the main branches right now. I think it's only the main branch of Avian. I don't know if the main branch of Avian is syncing with the main branch of Bevy right now or not. We can actually go check. Two days ago, this looks like where the development is happening. Let's look at crates. Let's look at Avian 3D. Let's look at Cargo Toml. 012. Looks like the main branch is still focused on 014, so you should be fine on Bevy's side of things. That would have been the really interesting part. This would conflict with your choice to use Rapier. This definitely, like, Avian 3D is a physics engine, or Avian is a physics engine, and then Rapier is a physics engine. So, like, if your choice is to use Rapier, maybe you don't use the crate. Maybe you just take some inspiration from the crate and use that to write a Rapier version. But this is where I would look to, like, figure out how to write that interaction, even if you were going to take this, learn from it, and then write a Rapier implementation. I think they're using Bevy Tenua. Oh no, Bevy FPS controller. Cool. You could also make a collision detection and pick up any item with a specific component you think. Yeah, you could definitely do like a raycast and whatnot. There's definitely ways to do like arbitrary interaction with foreign objects. They specifically asked for a Half-Life 2 style implementation. So that's why I pointed them to this instead of. You are using Tenua for NPC stuff. I was just debating that earlier, whether I should use Tenua for NPC stuff or not. Like these customers right now, I've tried to keep them as simple as possible, but I feel like I'm hitting the limit for as simple as I want it to be. I need to start choosing either Seldom State for State Machine or Bevy Tenua for character controller, and then I can drive it via Leafwing or something like that instead. But more importantly is the game mechanics here. So the other thing is that if we go with a heavily inventory-based game and you're playing on a controller, it's kind of tough. Right? Like you're not going to be able to interact with the inventory on the screen very well. Yeah, you wanted to use Avian, so opted against Bevy FPS controller. Now you got to look at Tenua to see if you want to use that or use Bevy FPS controller and do your own. I think that, so the thing that I'll say is that Bevy Tenua is complex for a reason. And the example is a little bit monolithic, is the way that I'll put it. The demo and the examples are like very, very much. Oh, maybe they added a new one. They might have added a new one. That's dope. This is very cool. Okay, they added a new, simpler example. That's really great. The other example, or like the demo, is very large. But with the cut down version of this, it's very much easier, I think, to get started with Tenua. The one thing that I had issues with when I started with Tenua is definitely 100% the volume of knowledge you kind of need to have to work with it really well. But it looks like they added some really great new examples over the last month or so, which is very exciting. These were needed for sure. Yeah. Yeah, so I would look at those examples for sure to get started. If you're going to do a Bevy Tenua thing, start with the regular example and then look at the animating one. Yeah, Ryan, I think that's because it used to be this demo folder, and this demo folder is like everything you can do with Bevy Tenua, which is very overwhelming. I had to read through a lot of this when I was doing the game jam. And the player animating system they have in here is like hundreds of lines too. So, yeah, anyway. I do like Bevy Tenua. It is working out well. And I think that the complexity of Bevy Tenua is justified. I think that character control is a complex topic. Yeah, learning projects, so implementing it yourself is also beneficial. Yeah. So there's also some links inside of the Bevy Tenua README for things like how to do floating, and et cetera, which is really great. The other thing is if you use a controller, it's probably going to be pretty hard to do this grid mechanic, which is kind of disappointing. I guess you could pre-select something and code in special controller support. But just thinking about controller support, it sounds like the more we do things like this inventory screen, which I know isn't very developed, but imagine you could actually interact with, 32 items in this menu or something. In fact, switching to Genua might make it easier for you to implement sitting in chairs. Do they have sitting in chairs by default? I know they have a bunch of built-ins. Yeah, so dash, jump, walk, crouch. Yeah, so it looks like a sit would need to be custom implemented. But I think a sit is basically just an animation more than anything else. Thinking about how to do a sit makes me feel like I might take the character control away from the player, like just remove the Bevy Tenua components entirely, and then play like the sitting animation and put them in the right spot, and then re-add it when the player tries to get up. I don't know, just a thought. Okay, so the building feels a little bit weird. It feels like it pushes it a little bit more towards automation game, and I don't think that I want to build an automation game. Yeah, just lock you in place and keep the ability to look around. Yeah. Add a new component, do just like a camera control instead of a full character controller. So building as a mechanic is interesting. I guess this isn't constraints. This is rogue-like-ish. How's that for a new term? Okay, so mechanics. If you can do your own layout of these like stores or whatever, that feels okay. It definitely feels like a little bit tower defensey, almost a little bit like buy upgrades to, overwhelm or have more capacity than the customers coming in. Rogue light. Rogue light, and you're really gonna hate me for this next part. Light. I'll make a YouTube video that says we don't have enough roguelike subcategories. You have a problem with WGPU errors on other computers. Sounds like you should be looking at the Bevy issue tracker. Depends on the WGPU error. My suggestion for figuring out how to, or whatever that WGPU error that you're looking at is, since you haven't said what it is, go to the Bevy repo, do a search for something like WGPU, include some of the error that you're looking at, any keywords or whatever. Let's see. Can I remember WGPU error? Let's do WGPU Linux. Then click on issues here, and then look through these. So some will be open, some will not be. Some will be like this, right? Like hopefully you'll find something like this or something that is closed that says, you know, WGPU panic, like WGPU on Linux with OpenGL in this configuration. And hopefully that configuration matches yours. And then you can go from there. Yeah, it's also interesting. If it's a validation error, it's not necessarily something that you need to worry about. If it's an error that is crashing your program or it's coming out as something that is like very important, yeah. Cannot load 3D examples on the website. But yeah, that would be my suggestion. WGPU backend direct handling as default. Yeah. A Radeon 3200? How old is that? $2008. That is almost a 2-decade-old GPU. I don't think that that's gonna hold up. I would be exceedingly unsurprised to see issues with 20-year-old GPUs. You also have a problem with your Firefox, but you're on NixOS, so yeah. If you're on some like specialty system, and I mean NixOS for me like fits into specialty system or whatever, then you definitely have to do some work to figure it out. You know, if you're on like stock Windows and something goes wrong, it's much more likely that there's going to be a bug fix. If you're on let's say Asahi Linux on a Mac that you were using from 6 years ago, maybe you should be fixing it. Okay, so big question to answer is, should building be in? I think I'm going to leave it for now. The two options are basically like a level can be a preset like laundromat, or it could be something that you build out over time. Oh, you have an ARC GPU? That's cool. I don't think I've heard of anybody with an ARC GPU yet. So, if this side of the game is a little bit more like tower defense, right? Because that's what happens if you end up building, like tower defense is effectively about capacity, right? You have towers that usually shoot incoming enemies that walk across on a line, but you can think about the mechanic in the same way as I have enough shooting capacity to fill up the bucket of health, right? And then there's like other minor twists and stuff. But if you think about this the same way, then you have to plant enough washing machines to have capacity to like take all of the clothes that are coming in. So it's interesting in that sense because I think that immediately leads to, at least in my head, just like this kind of gameplay. Right? And this doesn't feel like it would be fun at the end of the day. Right? Like this is the optimal build for that mechanic. And I don't think that that's very fun. I don't think that that would be great or interesting. So I think that actually unless it's more like you have these 5 things to place, you can place them however you want. I do think that's a big issue though, with the current way that it's set up. Also hilarious that I can just run on top of all of these. You think Bevy plus an ARM computer like a Raspberry Pi would be a cool combination, programming games under 10 watts plus a screen? There's some work to do, no standard stuff that is recently merged or is in the process of being merged, which is very cool. That's not the Bevy repo. There's an issue for it specifically. Is this the one? This is not the one I was thinking of, but this it made it in. Perfect. So there was a PR that went in this week that we'll talk about in This Week in Bevy that moved to preferring core imports over standard imports for all of Bevy's internal stuff. And this opens up the possibility that plugins could be no standard, right? This is not loading. This is going to be way too big to view on the web. But anyway, people are working on no standard stuff. It's very exciting. Does Bevy's render to texture support 2D scenes? The demo only shows a 3D cube being rendered to a texture. I think you can render anything to a texture. Like even so, the way I would phrase it is game engines or modern game engines tend to render everything in 3D anyway. So the rendering stack is all 3D, even if like the camera and the projection and whatever is 2D. So if you can render something and it shows a 3D example, that should also work for 2D, unless you're talking about like depth of field or like a camera effect, you know? You should be able to render any camera to a texture, including 2D cameras. Hopefully the future is RISC-V with open source GPU drivers. That'd be sick. Didn't the new Pico Isn't that RISC-V cores? Not the 2040. What's the new chip? The RP 2350? Is that the chip? I think this is RISC-V. Yeah. So I think you get 2 ARM cores and 2 RISC-V cores, and you have to choose between them. So I think you can run 2 of them at a time. Hey, Geek Masher. Nice to see you on the stream. Yeah, it's ARM or RISC-V, but you have to choose one or the other at boot. I should have one of these coming. I don't know if it's shipped yet. Actually, I think I have 2 of these coming. But Embassy has been really fun to work with. Yeah, cool. Yeah, stream is pretty chill, Geek Masher. We kind of just like work on whatever. I really only work on this project on the weekends for a couple of hours. So like, you know, from 8 to 12 on the weekends. So it gets about 4 hours of work a week. And those 4 hours are stream hours, which means that the progress is pretty slow. But it's very fun. Right now I'm considering what the mechanics need to be for this to be like a game. So we have a couple of mechanics since you're here. We have a virtual grid placement, so we can place like, you know, some kind of work machine, like a washing machine or something like that. This little highlight is customers spawn in on this mesh. They run here, drop off their stuff, which you can go pick up. There's too many of them for me to turn the light off. But then I can go up to any of these machines and click on them and they start doing work. When they're done doing whatever processing they were doing, it gives it back, and then I can give it back, and then they'll walk away. Never mind, you just found the render UI to texture demo. Sadly, Firefox won't run it. Are you on the web GPU demo? If you're on the web GPU demo, make sure you're on the WebGL demo if you're trying to run it in Firefox. Or if you're doing web GPU, then you have to enable web GPU in the nightly Firefox build. It's not stable for web GPU yet. So you would have to go Bevy examples. This is examples WebGL2. These are the ones that will run in every browser. If you want to look at the web GPU stuff, you can, but it will only run in Chrome right now. I think it runs in Chrome on Android as well. So like if I clicked into one of these, I don't know, 2D Bloom. This is the web GPU version of 2D Bloom. If I open Firefox Developer Edition, this should not run. I don't remember if I have the flag on. I probably do have the flag on now that I think about it. Why can't I click? I need to do a computer reboot soon. Something is wrong with my computer in the fact that for some reason like my clicking isn't working for whatever reason. I don't know actually. Anyway. But yeah. If you're on web GPU, it probably won't work in Firefox unless you enable the flag in nightly Firefox. Make sure that you're on the WebGL2 version of that example if you're running it on the website. You can definitely use web GPU, but you're probably, from what you've said, you probably want WebGL. You're also doing in-game monitor. Just set up an image as a resource and assign that handle to the camera's target, and then a material resource gets the same handle for its base color texture. Nice. Yeah, I like the way cameras work in Bevy quite a bit. Okay, so we've identified that if we do building and there is no restriction, the optimal like build is probably something like this, especially if customers can come in and go to it. Let's say this pushes towards automation, incremental, or tower defense as genres. That's not what I wanted to do. P, word wrap. I don't think I want to build an automation game. I don't think I want to build an incremental game. And I'm not against a tower defense game, but we'll leave that as a soft no for now. So I'm leaning towards actually building probably not being in the game. That's kind of hilarious. So if that's the case, then we'll have to create individual levels. I guess the other option is don't let people build 72 washing machines. I just feel like it's very, very, very hard to like, if you do building like this, or like for tower defense or incremental or whatever, it's very, very, very hard to balance the longer end of it. Because the sooner you build all of these, the better. And then once you build them all, you either don't have any more space to build more, or they're fully upgraded and you're just like cranking through everything easily. So they have to have not a large impact on what actually happens. Which makes me think that we should do no building. I'm curious as to what your answer for that question is. You think of it as basically a pointer. Yeah. A pointer in the sense that a handle is a link to something. So handles are usually used for, I'm going to call them large assets, but they're not really, like the size doesn't define them. Assets that you kind of don't want to duplicate is the way that I would say it. So if you have a handle, then you have like the ID that stores a particular kind of asset. And what that means is that when you go into the assets resource, or the assets database is the way that I think of it, you can use this handle to look it up and access the actual values. They're mostly right when they say pointer. I just kind of avoid saying pointer for most people because it tends to be either too generic for people who don't know what pointers are, or too scary for people who kind of know what pointers are. And if you already know what pointers are and you're good with them, then you don't need the explanation. So handles can be strong or weak. I think weak handles are kind of a niche use case. You usually have a strong handle. You only get 140 characters at a time. Yeah. So basically a handle is an ID, more or less. And it points to some asset. So what you do when you are spawning something in with a handle, what you're doing is saying, here's a location for that asset. Here's the ID of the asset that you're going to use for the standard material, or the ID of the asset that you're going to use for the mesh, or the ID of the asset that you are going to use for this other thing. We've got another one. Handles are basically pointers or references, but allow for reference counting and the reallocation of that, of what is pointed to, without the need to change the handle value. Yeah, so you can change the thing that a handle points to as well. I feel like that's fairly less common. I've done that for like the default handle for fonts, but I feel like that's not a super common use case. Tell me you don't all pray to the x86 opcode manual before we go to bed? Well, the people who do are working on the Rust compiler, I guess. And I am thankful for them to do that. Okay, so the question becomes, we've got this inventory system. Inventory in building pushes us in this specific direction that I'm not sure I want us to go in. It feels very easy to fall into like a tower defense-y kind of game. I wouldn't mind going in a tower defense-y kind of direction, but it definitely feels a little bit different. Yeah, I don't know. I'm new to this low-level programming languages, but Rust is cool. Yeah, so if you, like I said, if you don't write C or you don't know what a pointer is, then just think of a handle as like an ID. You know, if you're going to go query a database, you need an ID to get the thing that you're looking for, to get the data you need. And that's what a handle is. A handle is just an ID to that thing that says, hey, I'm using this for now. I do want to be able to do upgrades, because I feel like clicking upgrades is just a nice little dopamine hit, honestly. The question is, what would you do that got you upgrades, and what would those be? If we're doing building, then the obvious answer... Well, I should rephrase it like this. If building is a core mechanic of the gameplay, because you build things in like Animal Crossing, for example, but those are rewards more than anything else. It's like you would build the one house over here or the one thing over here, and then you would decorate it. Point to something. So the question becomes, if you're setting this up for customers to like operate themselves. I guess I am kind of building waves in right now. All right, this machine doesn't work. um, the other thing that's nice about manually setting up levels is that if you do manually set up levels, then this idea of like the washing machines don't actually do the washing is easy to execute on, because then you can build a level and you can build pipes from these machines to the other room. I don't know. I feel like the question in my head is clicking through these boxes for the inventory interesting enough? And I feel like my answer is no. But I also wouldn't be against just doing it. Like if this wants to be a tower defense game, then maybe we just make it a tower defense game. Is there a reason to have a player character if it's a tower defense game in that sense? That's the other thing that I'm thinking through. Like if we're doing a bunch of like menu clicking, right? If it's, you know, do this, place that, get rid of the grid or whatever, then why do we have a character in the game? You can only interact with machines near you right now. See that little like red thing right now? You have to be inside of that circle to be able to actually interact with this. It's interesting to an extent. I feel like for what I wanted to do originally, the inventory stuff just pushes in a much different direction, right? Like there was one game that I think Kukasu pointed out to me where you basically run over and you pick up the customer and you throw them around. Let me find the name of that game quickly, and I'll show you what I mean. As long as Steam doesn't kill my... I'm always nervous about opening Steam because anytime something downloads, my internet connection dies. Where is this? This is that. Okay. Choppy Cuts game. So this is a very basic game. Maybe I do open the Steam page. That's SteamDB. That's not what I want. Yeah, the hairdressing choppy cuts. Yeah. So the gameplay for this is very much like pick up customers, throw them around the stations, and then do stuff. So it's to some extent similar vibes, right? Like you have to put things in locations. They have to spend some time in those locations, and then they're done and they move on to the next step, right? They're set levels. And one of the nice things is it's a little bit more physical than just clicking through menus. Which I kind of like. Like, I kind of like if something went wrong inside of the laundromat and it was like spilling out, you would have to go get the, you know, mop and go mop it up. Like that kind of vibe. I think in general, also this one, and then we were talking about Ware Cleaner is another physical game. And I feel like I just see a bit of a, how do I say this? Gameplay trailer. There we go. I feel like I see a little bit of a theme in that sense. Like the gameplay has no menus in it at all, right? In this case, if somebody sees you or whatever, you know, you turn into or you are a werewolf and then you need to go deal with them. But if I'm trying to go into this genre in general, right? Even Overcooked. Overcooked on Steam. The Pumpkin King. Is this a cinematic trailer? There we go. I don't want a cinematic trailer. I want to see like regular gameplay. But, like these are very physical too, right? Like there's no menus here. There's nothing like that. You have to go, you pick things up, you put them down, you place them in different places, the environment reacts, etc., etc. So I think if I want to move in this direction, I think we don't do the inventory stuff. Structs and impulse are like classes in Rust. Yeah, close enough. So we haven't done any pickup logic or anything like that. We haven't done any. I do like the idea of the washing machines not actually doing the washing, right? I think that in that case, we do static levels and not building. So the levels are preordained. I gotta learn Rust before jumping into Bevy, but yeah, Bevy is too fun. I think you can do both at the same time, honestly. Bevy does a lot of things that are really nice in terms of learning Rust. Like when you start talking about writing systems and things like that, like I could click into some random thing here as long as it has systems in the file. That's just actor. Prop? Well, that's what I get for clicking into a project that I'm not familiar with. But yeah, like one of the really nice things about Bevy is that it lets you encapsulate everything into these small systems. And you don't have to deal with a lot of like architecture. And I think that's one of the things that trips people up when they're new is kind of like figuring out how to architect an entire program or an entire app or an entire whatever. Bevy comes with an architecture for you. So you end up writing a lot of these systems. These systems very clearly like are either mutable or not mutable or whatever. So you still get to learn all of the Rust stuff, but you get to do so in kind of like incremental ways. That's what you mean, Bevy is an ECS framework already, but it's all decoupled already. I don't know. I think you can couple things as much as you want, depending on how you wrote the code, but... Okay, so let's slow down the player a little bit. I feel like the player moves too fast. That's why we're multiplying it by 10, same as the customers were coming in. So let's do like 3 maybe. It's a little bit slow. Do something more like 6. I want it to feel like you're kind of running around, but not. That feels okay. So I guess the big question is, do we stick with the inventory menus or do we do something more physical? And both are very valid. I think if we stick with the inventory menus and like the inventory of the machines and stuff, then it turns into something like a tower defense game. It turns into something like an automation game. I think that increases the scope too much. I wanna get this to be a smaller game. So I think going kind of not moving that direction and doing something more physical makes more sense. So I think actually this virtual grid placement stuff is probably not going to make it into the game. Now that I think about it. And then the inventory menu, probably also not. I think we just don't do inventory in menus. This is why I'm thinking about this so much, because it feels like just continuing to code without deciding this pushes the game in a very specific direction. So let's start with this. Let's start with putting more machines in the world and having customers go to the machines instead. And if we're going to do that, we kind of need to have machines that are already placed. So this is a... This is our raycast system. These are all the components that we need for that to work. I guess when people put their stuff into the machines, that's one of the things we need to do too, actually. I want to do timer labels on the machines so that it's easier to identify when things are actually in the machines. And I think that that's true no matter what. So maybe we start with that. I want to be able to place them inside of Blender though, so let's finish realizing what these are. So obstacle, spawn blueprint, inventory. I think that the level 2 here that we have, let's get rid of that. Let's look at this. What components does this have on it? Basically nothing. That's because it is a thing in our library. Let's go check our library. So this is our machine right now. This machine has a collider, a label of a washing machine, an on-click handler, and a rigid body. So this would need to have also obstacle. And inventory and default work duration. I think default work duration, we didn't register, so we have to register that. And then inventory, I'm also not sure we registered. Oh, we did register it. Perfect. Add our inventory here. Our inventory max item count, we'll set it to be 5. I don't think we're going to actually use the inventory in this scenario. But we should be able to get rid of these now. And then default work duration will reflect component. Wow, I'm having trouble typing. I think we need to register this then as well. Yeah, Bevy is awesome. Just keeping everything decoupled is the thing, you know, which makes programming not as intuitive. For example, you want to make a cube, but you want to have it as a plugin instead of just putting it into the main function. And then it's hard to think of this decoupling if you didn't know that Rust in general is more like C++ and not like Python, which is heavily class-based. You want to make a cube, but you want to have it as a plugin instead of just putting it into the main function. I mean, that's how... I guess what isn't intuitive about that is my question. Like, what are you finding difficult about figuring out how to do that? Are you not sure how plugins like really work, or are you Yeah, I'm curious about what that means for you. Let's do a register type here. So the reason I'm doing register type is so that we can write this into our registry. I'm going to only write registry. That'll write out a registry JSON, and then we'll be able to access that inside of Blender. Thing is, you can't create the same instances of the same plugin. So if you want to have multiple cubes, yeah, I guess say more about that. You want cubes to be a plugin. Why do you want cubes to be a plugin? Right, like the way I would think, if you want multiple cubes, right, and you want them to be all instantiated in the same way, I would think that that would be a bundle of components. So I'm curious as to why you're thinking. I'm curious as to why you're thinking objects are plugins. Yeah. Okay. Let you say ball is a plugin. And while you're typing that, I will grab our default work duration here. Did that fail? Add. Oh, interesting. Default work duration doesn't give me the option to work with it. Okay, interesting. Yeah, it's more a bundle than a component. No, it's more of a bundle than a plugin. Like, I'm curious as to, like, if you think about a cube, right? Which Bevy has in his examples, so I'll go look at the cubes. If we go to examples and we go to 3D, there's a 3D shapes example. So somewhere in here, there's a spawn function, right? This spawn function is the thing that spawns the cube into the world. In this case, we're using a PBR bundle, which means that we are using a shape that is a cube, some material, so some color, some, standard material kind of stuff, a transform, and then we're labeling it with shape, right? This is a cube effectively. It is the handle to the mesh. It is the handle to the standard material. It is the transform component. And then there's some other components as well in the PBR bundle. So if you wanted to create multiple cubes, you would spawn multiple times. And where is that function? You mean like what place is it? You have to write a system, right? So in this case, it's a setup system. So you write this system. And in this case, we've added it to the startup schedule. So when the application starts up, that system runs, and then we spawn those cubes. Right. So the way that Bevy works, you basically write systems, and those systems run at specific times, and they do their work. And then the next frame, they do it again, and the next frame, they do it again, that kind of thing. In this case, there's a special schedule called startup that will run that when your application starts. So it's not a struct impl, it's not a class, it's not a plugin. It's literally just a setup system. That setup system has the logic. So it uses commands and these two mesh and materials arguments to spawn a cube. In this case, it's spawning multiple shapes. Yeah, Bevy examples, 3D shapes. I understand that the amount of code that I show on stream is, you know, I think I only get 20 lines of code with the size that it needs to be. So. But this example is the bevyengine.org examples. That example is this example. Dynamically spawn it in response to what? So the question is, how do you, so let's talk about this from the beginning, right? So you've got a new Bevy app, right? There are some plugins here, like the default plugins, which set up the window and do some other things that Bevy wants to. This is just a system added to the app that will run on startup. Right, so it's not really part of any plugin. You could put it into a plugin, it doesn't matter. But fundamentally, this is a system that you're running on startup in this case. These are systems that you're running every frame, so in update. So in this case, rotate is a system that will run every frame. Toggle wireframe is a system that will run every frame. So when you say, how can you make it dynamically spawn something, when do you want to spawn it? How do you, like, what, in response to what are you going to spawn it, is the question. Right, like if somebody's going to write, hit the key code I or something, right? If they were going to hit a space bar key, you would add a system to the update. That system would be right here. It would be something like rotate. In this case, toggle wireframe is going to be a better example. So in toggle wireframe, it's this very simple, straightforward system, right? It takes the keyboard resource, so for key code button inputs, checks to see if the spacebar was just hit, and then does something. And this is where you would spawn it. So if you wanted to spawn a cube on a button click, if the timer from another plugin hit 0. Okay. So how could you dynamically spawn it from within another plugin? Plugins are not like special, right? Like things don't happen inside of plugins. I think that's kind of the confusion here. Plugins are just like file organization, more or less. So let me show you what that means. So for me, I have this grid plugin, right? We get access to the app in the same way. I'm doing a bunch of things that you won't have to do, like initting resources and registering types. I add some other plugins for whatever reason. And then add systems is the thing that you need to care about. And this can happen in a plugin or it can happen in the app, wherever you want it to happen. But fundamentally, you're going to add these systems to probably the update schedule and they will run. In this case, I have additional run conditions where they only run at certain times. But if you're going to do something like have a timer, I assume you put that timer in a resource somewhere so that you can access it. Right? So inside of one of these systems, I don't think I have a timer. Yeah, I do. So here's working, right? Working is a timer. So here's where I insert the working timer. That's a component that just gets added to something else. Just some timer new with some duration, runs once. And then there's this system, do work, which will go back up to the top for a second. That is running in update. So do work is running in update. That's once every frame is what update means. So I'm querying for anything that has a working component along with the current time. For each of those things, I'm ticking the timer and checking to see if it just finished. If it just finished, then I'm doing what you would do is spawn, but what I'm doing is I'm taking that component off and I'm inserting something else. But this is where your spawn would be. So you would get whatever timer. You're probably going to do like it in a resource from the way you're talking about it, not it on a component. But you're going to do like res, you know, my timer, res, my timer, right? Wherever you're storing this timer, then you'll tick the timer and check to see if it finished. And then when it finishes, commands.spawn. So basically the way a Bevy app works, or the way a Bevy game works, is that there's some things that run when the application starts up. There's things that run every frame. And those are the things that you're usually working with, especially when you're just starting out. So you're going to add this system to run every frame. Yeah, this timer resource you can just query, right? Once it's inserted into the world, right? Let me be more specific, right? Let me do, right? Like struct my timer could have a timer in it, and this will derive resource, right? And then up here you do like insert resource, my timer, timer new, right? And then timers don't do anything unless you tick them. So you do have to tick it like I was talking about before, but that will put the, yeah. Don't forget to put pub here if you want to bring in this type into another file. But yeah, like once you add the resource, resources are available globally. The things that plugins add to the app are available globally, right? You aren't chunking your app into exclusive, cannot talk to anything else boxes. You're putting everything into app, and plugins are just kind of like a code organization kind of thing. Right? Like I'm using this to group together everything that I need to work with the grid, basically. So you don't need to, you don't need to like pass things into plugins and share things with plugins. And like in general, think of a plugin as just like a file, right? Like a module. They're basically the same thing, especially for the basic usage. Right? Like you have this plugin, you get a reference to the app that you created from your main function or whatever. You get to do whatever you want in here. So it's just kind of like collections of behaviors, like Ukasu's saying, like functions that do, you know, things related to spawning a cube, or things related to, you know, ticking the timer or whatever. The other thing you could do, there are other options as well. If you want to directly tick the timer in that system, you can totally do that, like I'm doing down here, wherever that was. The other thing you can do is in your plugin with the timer, if you're putting all of your timer stuff over there, you can create an event. And then that can trigger either with an observer or trigger an event reader. And then that event is how you deal with like inter-plugin communication, right? It's not really inter-plugin because the plugins don't really exist at runtime. But basically you have this thing, right? This timer. You have to tick that timer. You're going to tick that timer in update every tick, right? Eventually it's going to finish. When it finishes, you can either directly spawn the thing right there, or you can call an event or an observer, probably an observer in this case. So it would be commands.trigger, whatever. And then that can spawn the cube, right? So there's a lot of options, but in general, systems are just regular functions. Those dependencies can get queried and passed in by the Bevy. We'll call it the scheduler right now. Yeah. Does that make sense? Like a plugin is not like a game object. Like game objects and plugins are not the same thing, if that makes sense. Okay, so this default work duration can't get reflected because it's a duration, which can't be represented inside of Blender, unfortunately. With required components, this is going to be significantly easier. Which I'm very much looking forward to. So maybe we don't have the default work duration for the moment. That is only used in this file. So where do we use it? Registering the type. Yeah. So in this case, because we don't have the default work duration, we won't actually be able to put stuff in, but we should see that warning. So let me restart this. This queries for default work duration. This is an observer, by the way. So pick stuff up, put it in the bucket. Still missing something. Still missing the ability to click on that, I think. Oh, that's because start work doesn't... UC plugins as a way to separate, group, or compose the component systems and resources and events in a way that is logical to you and your code, but have nothing to do with how things work. Yeah, definitely. Like, if you think of Rust modules, like the module system, plugins are kind of just like the module system, right? They're a module system that gives you access to the app in which you're running so that you can add your stuff. There are obviously more complicated things you can do with plugins, but by far the most common way of using plugins is just code organization. Like, I happen to add this plugin here. I happen to add these systems in this other plugin, et cetera, et cetera. But plugins don't exist at runtime. So you would never be like, this plugin does that, right? It's always a system doing the work. Okay, so this is doing manual spawns. And then the question is, this interact with machine is doing queries for machines with inventories but don't have working. So machines, info, machine. Let me do my Rust log to only show my own logs. So I click on this. I think that's the issue right there. Is it the same if I do this? No. So this actually does get picked up, whereas the other one did not. Trigger event machine entity. Okay, entity inventory none. Oh, that's in a different spot. That's in 280. That's here, it looks like. Yeah, for you, code structure is very important because I don't want to have 20 if else, if else, if else. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a conversation to have there for sure. I think that if you're used to doing class-based organization, it will be a little bit mind-bendy to move away from class-based stuff. I would say that most things, when you think about them inside of a Bevy context, are just like free-floating functions, like somebody else said earlier. I forget who said that. Yeah. It's interesting from a pedagogical perspective because the people who seem to have more issues with Rust are people who already know another language, because unwinding the other language that you know to rewind it into Rust and then knowing both approaches is much more difficult than going from zero to understanding Rust. Because your brain, especially if you only know one other language or one specific class of language, then your brain is very, very used to being like, oh, I'll just create another class. But like, there is no class, so what do you do? And that's the biggest barrier, in my opinion. Okay, so this has the trigger entity and whatnot. Why is this triggering for one and not the other? None of these logs are triggering for the Blender placed version. So this query is for entities that have inventory, washing machine, and don't have working. So inventory, washing machine, doesn't have working. Feels like this should work. Maybe I didn't save this. Did I not save that? It's the Blender you didn't save it issue? No, okay. So this is still not picking up on the click, whereas the other one most definitely is. So we're missing something still. A big thing that helped for Ryan is that realizing there's never going to be a quote self. Anytime you need one of those, you have to figure out how to get it via a parameter passed into the function. Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting notes for sure. The idea that you don't have this like state that you're keeping around, if that makes sense. Yeah, the architecture, ECS especially, definitely exists in multiple languages. I think some of the more popular or more widely mature and used ECSs are actually written in C. I don't know if it's C or C++. Trigger entity. So this machine's is not picking up. I don't have multiple washing machine components, do I? Did I mess that up? Register type with query entities. Okay. This is triggering on machine interact. So I need to go find where we're triggering that because I think that's the issue. Observer name machine interact. On click observer name. Yeah, I think we all know what you mean though. ECS might not have been the right word, but I think we all know what you mean. So Blender on click. Do I have Blender on click in here? I do. Machine interact. On pointer click. Did I not have pickable on this? Is that the issue? Main menu, inventory modal. I haven't had to manually put pickable on anything, so it makes me think that that's not the issue here. More comparing Rust to the usual object-oriented languages like Python, Java, etc. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So collider constructor, etc. This is a component hook. So basically what we have going on here is that we have this struct. This struct gets registered into the registry JSON that we pull into Blender. When this component is added to an entity, we take the observer name, and depending on what that observer name is, we attach a click handler. In this case, it's supposed to trigger machine interact for that entity. For some reason, that is not running, or there's something else going on. So let's do a debug here. Let's do an info. Let's see if this is even running when the game boots up. So it should have already ran. Doesn't look like it did. So let's start with on add Blender on click, and then we will do another one for the observer name. Which is causing an issue for some reason. Oh, right, because let's stick this ahead of the message because we can take advantage of tracing special syntax to do observer name and do that with a key value pair there. Yeah, it feels very much like that's not running for the washing machine in the scene, which is really interesting. Grid, blender on click, machine interact. This is the component. Is there an issue here? Doesn't look like it. I mean, there are issues here, but they're not they're not related issues. They are other issues. So let me then look at Bevy Inspector eGUI and make sure that this thing has the actual components that I think it does. So in level 2, we have some children. This is a vending machine. This vending machine has vending machine. This vending machine has none of the components. That feels wrong. Parent, transform, view visibility, inherited visibility. I think that it's not saving out from Blender for some reason. Which is interesting. That says it's saved. So let's go check, I guess, levels. We'll grab the GLTF from level 2 GLB. I guess the GLTF for level 2 wouldn't necessarily have that information. It's interesting to me that that information is on the collection. There it is. It's on the collection. Some of this information can get overwritten. It doesn't feel like any of this actually gets included. Am I using the right component here? Or not the right component, but the right components for this mesh. This looks one off. I think that's my issue. Where is my add collection instance washing machine? There we go. And I delete this one and save. I don't know why I had a random machine that was not relevant. Okay, so that was the issue. The issue was in Blender. I wasn't using the right object. Turns out if you don't use the right object, it doesn't work. Okay, so now we can just kind of place these around in the world. So let's do... I don't know that I want to duplicate. If I duplicate this, is it gonna... Let's set them up on the back wall for now. Nope, nope. I always forget which one of these is the... So hopefully duplicating this is not going to get me into trouble. And we can do some nicer spacing at some point later. So now we'll have a bunch of them, right? Machines 0 through 5, which are 6. So now we can just kind of set up levels like that. And then the customers that come in, when do we assign them one is the question in my head. When do we assign them like one of the machines to actually go to? I guess that's a long-term question too, right? That could be as simple or as complicated as we want it to be. Do we just mirror those on the other side then? Anyway, what I want the customers to do is to pick one of these each to go to. So to do that, that starts to sound more like a state machine. But it also starts to sound a little bit more like group dynamic state, not just individuals. I guess it could be individuals. So let's start with that. Let's go customer NPC. Customer NPC has, what did I call it? I didn't call it target or something easy like that, right? I called it something really silly. I called it, I don't know, object or something like that. Spawn cycle, spawn event. This will spawn, this spawns randomly. A lot of that code is going to get deleted in 0.15. I'm very excited about that. So the customer has some items, NPC, customer NPC, object, drop off entity. This is the entity that we need. So we need to RNG pick one of those washing machines rather than doing this drop off. So drop off entity here. So I'll say this is the old single drop off location. And I guess, do we want to put something in front of these? Because we could just copy and paste that drop-off location, right? This is the pickup location. This is the spawner. This is the floor. This is the customer drop-off. The customer drop-off for us is this little plane. I feel like reusing this is the right thing to do. Now, we only expect there to be one for the moment. So when we duplicate this and load it in, it might crash something or it might cause an issue. But let's start with Shift Z. Yeah, there we go. Start with doing like that. I feel like this is going to be part of the machine itself or part of the grid in general. We aren't really using a grid here, so it's fine for the moment. No drop-off entity. So let me code support for potentially multiple, I guess. This is not going to be single. This is going to be .iter choose. And then we need RNG. I forget how to set up RNG, so there it is. Wait, do we choose right next to it? We already have RNG here. There's RNG. Okay, so iter choose sum. I don't know what to say in this error message now because we're basically iterating over all of the drop-off locations now and just picking one for the player to go to, or not the player, the NPC to go to. So this should work. The issue, and this is one of the reasons it's nice to like think about that kind of thing ahead of time. Spawn NPC. Oh, it's going to take a long time. I guess that's okay. We could speed it up. It's going to go over to the first. So all of these are now going to go first. And then we'll have something where they face the machine and like interact with it or something. Cool. So let's see if it breaks if we... How do I lock you? Oh, I know I didn't talk about this when y'all were actually here. So that drop-off shader, we changed the UV coordinates. So if I look at this, remember last week we were using the world coordinates for the drop-off shader? The drop-off shader is now correctly UV unwrapped so that the Y is bottom to top, and we just use that. So it's location independent now, which is great. So theoretically, this should work. I'm not going to overlap them at the moment, but this will at least work for picking one of them. I don't know if it'll work for some of the other systems. I don't remember if we wrote them to assume that they have one or not. The zombie horde can come in. So we've got somebody at 4, somebody at 3, 4, 5, 1, 2. Now they aren't doing anything with the machines or anything yet. And they should actually be idling, and I don't know why they're not idling. Maybe there's something else. But this starts to feel better. I feel like there's some crowd logic to write. And technically, I think I could run over this and pick up from this now. Let's spawn one immediately. Oh, I guess we made them kinematic, didn't we? I was like, why did he walk right through the wall? I forgot we made them kinematic. We haven't coded any of the... That's interesting. Why is there no drop-off notification? Do you need to have somebody on... Somebody go step on the first one. Come on. Maybe they're too low. Maybe they're not actually standing on some of these. I didn't think I changed the way that it worked, but maybe I did. G... Y? No. Z? Yeah. Then raise this up a little bit and save. I guess also run without our log restrictions. Let everything log out, just in case there is something going wrong. Spawn. So we'll have to code them to make sure that they can interact with the walls and stuff. Yeah, okay, so that was it. They weren't actually like stepping on them, or they weren't actually in them. So theoretically I could do this. I don't know if it expects it to just have one available or not. But this is also an argument for not coding with the, you know, get single approach. Okay, so that works. They can get there to the new machines standing in front of them. We'll need to code it so that they can actually, I don't know, do a little animation or something. I think that we'll also want to have additional logic for restricting going to a machine that is not active anymore. I don't think I'm concerned about that for the moment, though. So the question is, where do these go? And what do we do with them? I think we have established that they basically go into this other slot. Like, if a customer comes in and they go to their thing, let's speed up these customers because that is just entirely too slow. We'll bring them back up to 10 for the moment anyway. Cool, so they run to their slot. And then that will like pipe through an output over here somewhere. And where that outputs isn't really that important, but I feel like it needs to match on some level. Trying to think. I think what it's going to do is probably just dump everything in a pile. But if it dumps everything in a pile, then how do you get them back to the customers? Because you kind of have to get them back into the right washing machine at that point, right? You have to get them back into the one that they thought the stuff was happening in. So maybe we just have tables on the right-hand side, and the inventory from the washing machine is also shown on the tables. Bye, Xavier. Have a good one. Thanks for hanging out. So if we go to the library and we reorient it on center and we create maybe a new collection in here. Let's call this table, I guess. Add mesh cube. Scale 0.5. This is the 1x1. So if we grab Z 0.5 up, that's the right spot. If we want to continue doing this, I think I want to try to undo that. So scale 0.5, enter on that. So now we're at 1. What size do I want the table to be? Probably a third. On the height. And then scale was it Y? Like this. And then grab Z. I feel like it still needs to be thinner. So we'll do that, and then we will, I guess, duplicate this. I'm not fancy enough to know exactly how to do the like 4 corners automatically. Let's see, can I think about it? I think it's a mirror. I think I can just do a mirror. So let's do add cube, scale it way down. What scale? I guess grab Z and move it up a bit because it doesn't really matter, right? So as long as it looks vaguely like it should be under there, then maybe we just do 2 of them. Modifier on the right hand side here. Mirror modifier. X and Z would be great. Doesn't look like it is doing that for me. Oh, this is on the its own axis, right? Mirror object, no. Is origin in here? No. 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 What did we call? Okay. Let's call this tabletop. Let's go back to this. Let's say that the mirror object is tabletop, maybe? Cool. And then we don't want Z, we want Y, right? So G, Y. We have like a really crappy table. Save that, go to the modifiers actually. I think we need to apply these. My guess is we need to apply these. Let's find out though. Let's go to our level. Actually, I want to do the material first. Let's do this material. New. Tabletop. Try to make it a brownish, maybe. Save that. Go to level 2. Drop in here, over here, hopefully. Collection instance of table. And it's not over here because it's at origin. So grab Shift Z and then just move it over here. Now we have a table. Yeah, so the mirror modifier you can see from up here does not work. Interesting. I wonder if that's something that we could enable. Ideally, I want to apply modifiers. I don't know if blenvy will actually use my preferences. Oh no, we just crashed. This is why you save your stuff. Okay, file. Open recent, these. This is our table. What was I doing? Right, the modifier stuff. Edit, preferences. I don't even know that I know what I'm looking for. Navigation key map, extensions, editing. Blender, GLTF, export settings. Hopefully this isn't manual for every single. Jeez, I don't need this to be so much. Okay. I don't understand why that site had that tutorial, but output. All right. Well, I think that I will figure that out some other time. Data combined, view layer used for rendering, render single layer, filter, custom properties, scene, gravity, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. All right. So I guess we'll just apply this for now. That's fine with me. How do I refocus camera on? I don't have a numpad, unfortunately. Okay, so this needs to have its modifiers applied. Apply, say, cancel, save. Why is Command W right next to Command S? So now we have 4 legs on the table over here. I guess we could just dump stuff onto the table. What time is it? About 10 more minutes left. Let's see. One of the things that I want to do is have a 3D representation of the objects. Okay, so it'll look something a little bit more like this, where the customers all go to one side and then the player's work gets done in another, I guess. I think that the implication here is that when you put stuff inside these machines, then it gets dumped out maybe onto a table. I have to do a little bit more thought about what I actually want to happen here, because I think the customers are going to come in with their inventories, put them into the things when they're available. Those will dump out over here, and over here you'll end up playing like a little juggle this item, put it over here kind of game. So we'll see. Hey, Bad Tunes, how's it going? This is effectively a game about running a laundromat. So right now there's a bunch of mechanics, like being able to place washing machines down on a grid. When customers come in, the area lights up. You can take their stuff, bring them to a machine. The machine does some work. When it's done, it'll let you know. You take it back, you give it back to the customer leaves the store. The thing for me today was that it was leaning very inventory slash like menu driven, and the implication of that is it turns into like an automation game, or it turns into like a tower defense game if it goes that way. So I'm taking a slight step back from that, and I'm trying to envision what it would look like if it was more physical, which involves basically, instead of manually building these, they will all be in Blender in preconceived levels, which come in and get spawned here. So the customers will spawn, they'll make their way to, you know, one of the machines or something. Maybe the building stuff still has a place. Maybe like you build extras or something like that around the core level. And then the idea, the theme is like these machines actually don't work, and they're just dumping the clothes like around the corner, if that makes sense. And then you have to like manually clean them all in the back to make people think the washing machines are working. And then put them back in, and the customers hopefully leave happy. And then like the washing machines might break or something, and you have to go like fix them and stuff like that. So TBD. One of my focuses right now is definitely like, it didn't seem like the direction I was heading in with all the menus and stuff was going to be particularly fun. So yeah, again, wanting to make it a little bit more physical, wanting to make it specifically, I think, more playable on controller. Cause like right now you can open a menu, check your inventory, drag things in and whatever. But on a controller, that kind of interaction gets a little bit tough. So my plan is to do something more like, oh, go pick it up from the pile it got dumped out in the back room. Yeah, we'll see. I think I have to do some thinking this week about what the mechanics should actually be. Obviously, the customers all stand in one spot. They don't collide with each other at the moment. They definitely could, but what was it? Kinematic. If I make them dynamic, they all kind of explode against each other at the moment because of the way that I'm doing the controls. The controls actually have to change if I change it to dynamic. The player itself is a dynamic rigid body. But if I spawn a bunch of these in, they kind of like bounce off each other and go wild at the moment. And then spin, because that's the other thing that my current controls are doing. So we're going to leave that kinematic for the moment. But yeah, I think that's it for today for the stream. I go for about 4 hours every Saturday morning. Yeah. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for showing up. And I will see you all next time. If I can find the button to end the stream.